My name is Liz McIntyre. I'm the director of Sheffield DocFest. I'm so delighted to welcome you to the lunchtime session today, which is the 2016 BBC interview. I'm thrilled that we're welcoming Reggie Yates to Sheffield this year, documentary maker extraordinaire, and also our host interviewer for the session, head of BBC Documentaries, Patrick Holland. So I would like to welcome Reggie and Patrick onto the stage.
Hello. Oh, Jesus Christ. He's arrived. Hello.
Started well.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session today as the BBC interview for Sheffield 2016. We're really, really excited and privileged to be talking to Reggie. And what the plan today is to talk about Reggie's career, go through some of his extraordinary films that he's been making over the last few years, and explore the way he makes those films and the way that the production process has changed as Reggie's and career in documentaries has developed over the last few years. Reggie has become one of the most distinctive and important documentary makers for us at the BBC, and I think for the whole audience. Over the last 3 years, you've taken on some of the hugely challenging, complex, and ethically nuanced stories, from the place of the white underclass in the new South Africa, which we'll go on to talk about, the rise of the new misogyny in the UK, which I found a very, very disturbing film, and to the American response to the shootings in Ferguson, Ohio. So we'll talk about lots and lots of these films in today's session. I'm just going to cause you to blush with some, it's not just us in BBC commissioning who love Reggie Yates. Extreme Russia won the Broadcast Award for Best Multi-Channel Series. Reggie won the massively competitive category of Best Presenter for the same series at the RTS Awards. Some of the critical praise that has flowed has included Reggie Yates' quietly angry documentary was full of power. Reggie Yates is informed without being pompous, engaging without being patronising, open-minded whilst being able to express opinion. And the last one, RTS jury said, Reggie is so natural, he comes through the screen as a highly relatable and unaffected documentary maker.
I kind of want to get off the stage now because I can only cock that up. That's way too nice.
So, welcome Reggie. First of all, we'll go back and start going through some of the sort of the ways you got into documentary making. Yeah. But what have you been up to? What you've been doing most recently?
Oh, there's 3 films that I've been making very recently that I am so excited about because I think, we're going to get into it today in the conversation, but this whole idea of growth and journey is a massive part of my time in docs, and ironically, and over the last 3 to 4 years, I think things have changed dramatically in terms of their importance to me as a filmmaker, and also the amount of influence and say I have, over the final product. And these most recent 3 films in particular, one in Mexico, one in Texas, and one in Chicago, which I've literally just come back from, I feel so proud of because I think that they are the closest to my own personal experience and what I felt and definitely saw while I was out there that we've ever really achieved.
So tell us about, we're going to show a clip of the Texas in a second.
Yeah.
Tell us about what is specific about the approach that you've undertaken with the Texan film.
I think with the film in Texas jail, I should probably give a teeny bit of background. So there is a new strand, if you will. Patrick mentioned Extreme, which had me go to South Africa, Russia, and then we did 3 episodes in the UK as well. And we're continuing that. There's more of those that we're making in about a month in Australia, which are going to be pretty interesting. But there's a new strand that we've sort of developed called, well, the name's changed a few times. But the new strand is we're going with is The Insider, which is the series of immersive films where I am literally living as my subject matter, if you want to call them that. And these immersive films are truly that. So to begin with, I went to Texas and I was arrested on the street and lived as an inmate for 5 days. And we're going to get to see a clip of that now. So outside of the sort of shock factor of being in a completely new scenario in a weird, strange world, I think what I've not only got from the films, but what I think really truly does come across is this idea of almost shedding who you are, at least on surface value, and getting to the truth of who you are as a person, and finding a way to tell other people's stories through stripping away all the things that you unfortunately bring to the table when you're the man in front of camera, particularly someone like myself who has had such a huge history in entertainment. There's a lot of sort of layers that I've had to scrape away at to get to the place that I feel that we're now finally getting really close to with the docs that we're making.
So that's pretty extreme, Reggie. Putting yourself inside a jail.
Right.
How do you get closer to the story? I mean, there's an obvious way in which you're getting closer, but
yeah.
Tell us about your own experience there. How did you get closer to the story by seeing it from that one?
I think so. I think from a personal point of view, I felt that I was in an environment where I had no choice but to sort of shed what makes me me. And well, that's part of the jail process anyway. You know, you lose all of your clothes, you lose your jewellery, you lose all of the things that, you know, we use to identify ourselves as individuals, and suddenly you're all in uniform and you are just one of many. So that was a huge part of it, and that really helped me get into the right headspace to sort of shed this idea of being the guy in front of camera and just becoming someone who's having an experience while the cameras are watching. And I think from the point of view of the inmates, I think they sort of looked at me differently straight away because, to begin with, they all thought I was some sort of basketball player or something who was being followed by reality cameras. I was like, who's that guy? Who is he? Who is he? Why is he here? And then quite quickly, well, the first thing that I did was the minute I got my cell and I was moved into a pod, they call them pods, like these, we call them wings, I imagine. So sort of a section of the jail that has 80 to 100 men in it. The pod that I was in had 80 in, and as soon as I was put in my cell, I was sort of anxious to get out and start to meet people because, I don't know, I've never been to jail before, and I've always sort of thought that, you know, you look a man in his eye and you shake his hand firmly, there'll be a level of respect there. And quite quickly I realised that it was exactly that, very similar to sort of my experiences growing up in North London and going to the school that I went to and growing up around the people I grew up around. Respect is this weird sort of currency that is at the top of the table, and the minute you showed respect, you received it. And for me, as someone who was looking for stories and you know the history behind the crimes of these men, I felt that I not only needed to earn their respect but their trust. And I was actually given the opportunity in this series, because of the nature of the film, to go home at any point. So my producers, who we work with, Keo Productions on this, my producers essentially said, look, we'd really like you to stay a night. And I think we had a meeting about this as well. And if you want to do anything after that, it's your choice. So I was like, all right. Now, one thing that you don't see at the beginning of that clip is me saying something which is 100% my truth, and that is that I genuinely have never been in trouble with the police, unlike a lot of the people I grew up with. And I've never been to jail, and I've never wanted to film in jail because I don't ever want to know what that experience is like, because I've invested so much time and energy, as have my family, to ensure that I never do. So to do it and to be in that situation and to suddenly find myself getting the respect of these men, I felt that it would be disrespectful of me to, after spending, I don't know, 12 hours in there with them, dressed like them, eating the same food, to go back to my hotel, hit the sauna and chill with some Netflix and some room service, and then come back the next day, put on my outfit and pretend to do it again. I felt that that would be wrong and disrespectful. So I ended up spending the entire 5 days there, not because I'm some tough guy, but because I got that that was the only way I was going to get the story, and that was the only way that they would trust me. And quite quickly I met another young man who had just got in on his first night, a young guy called Alex, and we sort of just did that because it was our first night. And we were both a little scared, and weirdly I ended up becoming his shoulder to cry on, because he had some serious mental health issues and was feeling suicidal, and quite very, very quickly I was his sort of rock And it was, yeah, it's a really special film, I feel, and I can't wait for it to be out there.
You mentioned about sort of shedding yourself, about sort of like ridding yourself to be in that. I think that there's a really interesting story that we'll sort of explore as we go through about how Reggie Yates, someone who's been in the public eye, whose career has developed, you know, within the entertainment part of the television industry, and how much of yourself that you are actually shedding, and how much actually, you know, Reggie Yates, in terms of your essential qualities, being able to get to the story, is actually what's at the heart of your great skill as a documentary maker. Should we talk about? We'll go back to that when we come into the later bit of the talk. Yeah. Let's go back to how you first.
I know where this is going now.
Got into the entertainment industry. Tell us about your childhood and about...
After this or before it?
After...
yeah, go on in.
What, show the clip?
Yeah, go on in.
I'm going to show you a clip now.
Jesus Christ.
So you're a man of strong opinions. Tell us about Desmond.
Well, that was the first thing I ever did when I was 8. I don't know if you noticed, but the girl that played my sister with the big bunches is Zoe Ashton. She plays Vod in Fresh Meat. And that was the first job that we both did, and we've been friends ever since, really good friends actually. And that was an incredible experience. I mean, first of all, it was only in watching that I realised I had a lisp. Whenever I talk about it, I start to get it again. And I sort of trained myself to lose my lisp after seeing myself on television. And my Uncle George started calling me a thespian for years. So anyway, I trained myself to lose my lisp. But as well as that, I had an incredible experience working on that show because for me, as a young black kid in North London whose parents weren't born in the UK, my grandparents brought my mother, and funnily enough, my father and his brothers came to the UK as kids as well. And for me, growing up, looking at my parents, work was something that they hated. You know, work was never fun, work was never enjoyable, work didn't pay well, and you know, it was all about sort of saving the pennies. And to suddenly get this job where I was surrounded by people that looked like my parents, that looked like my family, who were having the best time ever and getting paid for it, it sort of unlocked a weird sort of door in my mind that said that you can actually work and enjoy it and be paid well, unlike everybody that you're surrounded by. And it started this journey in entertainment and eventually docs. And
so, in your 20s, you start to be presenting more and more. You're DJing. Tell us about because I mean you have become a very, very significant face of the entertainment programming as well.
Yeah, I mean I started in telly at 8 and I started presenting at about 11, I think, and I was doing bits and pieces. I did like a big thing for London Underground, and then at 12 I started presenting for Disney, and then presenting sort of straddled, where it was school, presenting and acting, and they were the 3 things that I was doing from primary school. And I was doing a bit of all 3 throughout my teens and then into my early 20s, and there was this fantastic opportunity that I found myself in at 18 to make a decision, basically, because I was at art college, and I did my foundation course at Camberwell Arts, and I was convinced I was going to be a graphic designer, but at the time I was doing all these different little jobs. So there was Grange Hill, there was Family Affairs, all these things I was doing. And then I got offered in the space of a week by letter, this is before email, I'm that old, I got offered a year's contract at CBBC, Top of the Pops for a year, and Radio 1 in a week, and I was 18, and you know, cumulatively that would have made me earn more than both of my parents like 3 times over, and they told me I couldn't do it. They said I had to do my degree, and being a West African boy, it became this massive sort of family meeting where we all sat down, and they decided to let me try it for a year, and I'm still on that year now. So yeah, we're still doing it, and it's lovely because it's become, this year's my 25th year in television, and I feel that it's sort of gone from this little experiment and this bit of fun and this idea of something that I could do to get me out of the house and to sort of, I don't know, satisfy this potential ADHD that I had because I was always doing something at home. It's now not only a career, but it's also a career that has been made up of so many different parts, and I feel that, well, it was said to me quite recently by a family member who's a bit too spiritual for their own good, but they sort of said, you have now found your purpose. And it's nice because I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing now.
So when you were going back to the time when you were working for Radio 1 and CBBC, I asked you about to think about who were the documentary makers, what were the documentaries, what were the programs that you watched at the time and thought, and saw you were presenting, there are other people involved in different types of program making with different roles, and you asked to discuss this particular clip.
Yeah, well, I at the age of about 15 or 16, I was acting quite a lot, and I was doing bits and pieces of presenting. And I remember, well, at that time, I had literally no say over what was shown on the telly in the house. We had one TV in the house, and my stepdad used to keep the remote on the arm of his chair. And occasionally, he would flick it away from horrible, crappy soaps, etc. And we started watching Louis Theroux. And I remember it vividly, because this was in the mid to late 90s. And Weird Weekends, I think, was the first series that he was doing around 98, 99, maybe earlier than that, in fact. And it just blew my mind, because this was someone who was doing what I do, which was presenting at the time, but it was different. And I'd seen documentaries before, but they always felt really sort of boring and journalistic, and they felt that they weren't speaking to me, and they weren't ever entertaining. It was just information, 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 and there was nothing in it that sort of pulled you in, and it wasn't human enough. And suddenly there was this guy on the screen with silly floppy hair who laughed at himself, and everyone laughed at him, but he would eventually get to the truth of an issue in a way that I'd never really seen before, and in a way that resonated with me and my family so much that you felt that you understood something in such a personal way. I loved Weird Weekends, and one of the episodes that really stood out to me mainly because it was incredibly uncomfortable. I was watching it with my parents, and that was when he went to go and make a film about porn in California, and it quite quickly stopped being about the sex and started being about the people and their lives, and psychologically what they were doing for a living actually affected them. And it was an incredible episode, and it genuinely inspired me. It made me think, wow, maybe at some point I could do something like that. It's awesome. This is awesome. I saw you giggling at his arms, right? It's ridiculous.
I just love where the camera was. It was absolutely perfect.
It's a great shot.
So there you are. You're thinking about, the documentary. You're a documentary fan, but you're a Louis Theroux fan. And you're working in entertainment. So BBC Three comes along, and Danny Cohen contacts you.
Yeah.
So tell us about when people first started talking to you about factual television and the sort of roles that you might have in factual television as opposed to what you were doing in entertainment.
Well, to be completely honest, I sort of looked at Louis and what he was doing as massively aspirational, and I never truly thought that I would ever be able to do anything like that, particularly being in my early 20s and sort of continuing to watch docs and starting to, watch docs like Hoop Dreams and see loads of amazing documentaries and think, wow, this is beautiful, incredible, inspiring filmmaking. But, I'm fucking Rustamouse. I ain't gonna ever get to do any of that stuff. So Danny Cohen called me in at BBC Three, and we sat down and had a really lovely chat, and he sort of said to me, I really think that you'd be fantastic doing docs. Now, this was off the back of actually making, weirdly, I was a contributor to a comic relief film called, Famous Rich and in the Slums, that was it. And it was a spin-off of Famous Rich and Homeless that Love Productions made. And for comic relief, I went out to Kenya with Lenny Henry and Sam Janis and blah, 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 and we lived as people in the slums for a week. And it was an amazing, incredible experience. But I was part of an ensemble, and I was sent out there as a presenter for comic relief, but to live as the people I was meeting. And it was an amazing experience. And I think that was the first time that a lot of people saw me in that light, and that motivated the meeting with Danny. So Danny and I sat down, and he said, I'd really love you to front your own docs. And I just went into this massive monologue about how I could never do it, how I'm not right for it, how you don't see anybody presenting docs that looks like me, let alone my age. Why is anyone going to believe it? And he was like, well, we've got this fantastic idea. We'd love you to do something with autism and potentially Tourette's. No, I don't know anything about it. And it was hilarious because he sort of sat there like this old wizard and sort of looked at me and laughed and said, look, everything that you've said is exactly why you should be making these films, because you are essentially just like the audience. If we present an issue that is difficult or incredibly niche but interesting, the audience 9 times out of 10 aren't going to have had any personal experience with that. So by you being the person making this film, you become the eyes and the ears and, more importantly, the voice of the audience. So you're perfect for it. You can't fucking argue with that, can you? So I said yes, and I went off and made a series that just sort of has begun this path, really.
Should we watch the clip and then we'll talk about
Sure.
the way that it changed the way you thought about program making?
Yeah, okay.
You know, the BBC Three at that time was commissioning lots of films with finding people to front documentaries, to
Right.
explore issues who aren't experts.
Yeah.
But tell us about what's going on with you there, because
Yeah, well, I for the first time, I think, in my career ever as a presenter, which I guess I am in that film, I got annoyed on camera, I got angry on camera with just a man on the street because he was laughing at Ruth. And quite quickly, after meeting her, I felt incredibly protective of her. And I hated the idea that people, because quite quickly I realised just how sweet she was and how much of a lovely person she was. And I hated the idea of people laughing at her for something that she just had no control over. And in that moment, I sort of realised something about myself, and that was that, you know, it's all well and good wanting to be protective of someone, but it's not actually about you. When you're making these films about an issue, it's important that you feel connected to the issue, you feel connected to the person that is introducing you to it, but it's not about you. And that, I think, changed the way that I looked at my role quite quickly, because to get angry or to get annoyed with someone who is delivering stuff that you might not necessarily agree with is a wasted opportunity. And that was where that thought process began. Because
as we go on, the Reggie Yates in situations in white squatter camps in South Africa and in Ferguson and Missouri, responding to situations on the street. One thing that always strikes me is about just how calm you can remain in situations when some quite extreme things are being spoken about.
Yeah, well, the trick is to listen, I think. It's not even a trick, it's just something that I think is important in life, full stop. If you don't listen, you don't learn, and I've employed that idea to every situation I find myself in, but also choosing when to challenge, because you have to challenge. You know, if you are at home on your sofa, you're watching, you're taking all this in, and at some point you're going to scream at your telly. I do it all the time, but it's choosing the right moment to do that. And I think it's great that in that film, I wasn't at that place yet, because it made me start to evaluate myself. And I think that was a really nice sort of arc of the series, that in spending all of this time with these young people with Tourette's, I not only learnt their stories and their struggles, but I also started to learn about myself and the way that I respond to that level of sort of attitude. And it changed the way that I feel that I navigate these films. And also, more importantly, the relationships I have with contributors, and how we relate, and also what I say on their behalf, and more importantly, what I don't say.
And what do you, from that experience, you said yourself that you were still the presenter in that, and rather than the documentary maker. Yeah. What was the difference? I mean, looking back now, what can you see?
Well, on a real sort of obvious sort of base level, those series, the Tourette's and the autism series, were a bit unique anyway, because they were hybrid. It was, the format of the show was that you, let's say with the Tourette's version, you take 5 or 6 young people with Tourette's and you spend time with them and their families and their friends, and you understand what their life is like and what living with the condition is really like. But all of the people that we met had a singing talent or some sort of musical talent, and we ended up putting them together with mentors. So I called a couple of mates. I got like Eliza Doolittle, Ed Sheeran, and other friends of mine to get involved in the sort of mentor process, and then they performed as part of a live band and part of a full-on show to a studio audience, and it was this amazing sort of hybrid of doc and entertainment. So I always felt like a presenter, because in the back of my mind I had the suit and the shoes and the mic and the lights of being the man fronting an entertainment show. So it was a bit of a strange, unique sort of situation, that one, I think.
But something started there with, your experience on the streets.
Yeah.
That made you think, the next time Danny Cohen came calling and then said, I've got something, or whoever it was at BBC Three came calling and said, what about doing Extreme South Africa? That you were interested in that more
because I knew
documentary aspect of it.
I felt that there was more to give. I think being a presenter in one of these environments is difficult because you are not shedding enough of yourself. You are basically coming to the table, knowing what you know, and you're delivering information. And that, for me, I think gets in the way of a film that can resonate. So I sort of, in looking back on the Tourette's films and the autism series, I could see that there was still a level that I wasn't able to sort of get to because of who I was in front of camera. And I sort of felt that not only going to Africa, but also being in situations that were that bit more extreme would push me in a way that I would be challenged on camera, and as well as that I would be learning with my audience. And it's easy to forget that these films are for BBC Three, and you've got a young audience who probably were unaware, but particularly with South Africa, were unaware of apartheid, or at least how recent it was. I think, was it last year? It's around 25 years, right, since apartheid ended, and for so many young Brits not knowing what it was and not knowing how shocking and sort of archaic the views were that were so commonplace in South Africa. I think it was important to not only present that, but also to deliver this idea of a young black British man in this environment and surrounded by these ways of thinking.
Well, let's look at the clip and then explore
Sure.
some of the issues that come up from it. Am I right in thinking that, that's you'd been with that community for quite a while by the time that had that discussion?
Not massive, about maybe 2 weeks at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. It was weird because I think it's incredibly important for people to feel comfortable around you. So to begin with, I did the best I could for them to know that it wasn't a hit piece that we were making, and that I was there to truly find out who they were as people and also try and understand their experience. And that then grew into conversations that stirred up some frustration and some anger and culminated in that conversation. And it was frustrating that, that was the views of someone who I thought was a really lovely person and a very incredibly warm woman. But unfortunately, her experiences led her to that level of belief, and it's just really sad. But it goes back to what I was saying about choosing the moment to challenge someone, because I wasn't having a row with her. I was trying to challenge her and trying to get her to have a conversation with me about her feelings and her beliefs. But again, it only got to a point because of my experience. I'm learning all the time. I'm by no means an expert in this world, and I truly feel that at that stage I was moving forward from what I'd learned from the Tourette's and the autism series, and it is continuing to grow now off of experiences like that one, because I really felt when I came away from that there was so much more that could have been learned from that conversation, but it only went as far as I was able to take it.
How important is the balance between knowing about a subject and discovering about a subject through the individuals you meet?
Incredibly important. I think that I'm adamant that whenever people refer to me in the films that I make, that they refer to me as a documentary filmmaker or just a bloke in front of the camera, because I am not a journalist. I'm not pretending to be a journalist. I don't want to be a journalist. I never have done. I think what I am genuinely interested in is people and their experiences and what makes them unique. And that is, I think, the common thread through all of the films that I've made, which hopefully will continue to be the thread, because I think going to some random location somewhere in the world and knowing what you're trying to, knowing the story that you're trying to tell in its entirety and all of its intricacies before you even get off the plane, I think is quite a responsible filmmaking. I think it's important to have a theme. It's important to know the issues that you want to tackle, but to sort of decide what part a person plays in telling that story and what role they fulfill is just irresponsible filmmaking, because you should allow the story to grow and blossom in front of your eyes. And if someone that you just meet on the street delivers something that you've never heard before, you should follow that person and follow that story, and that then tells you something that may surprise you and also may open the door to a whole new area of the conversation. And that's what I think the best films that I've made have been, and that is a conversation, as opposed to a thesis that you stick to and a lovely little bow wrapped around it at the end. I actually prefer the docs that end on a question and have people come up to me on the street and want to talk to me about what they've seen and tell me about the conversation they had around the dinner table with their family, as opposed to feeling frustrated with an idea that was presented as fact at the end of a film.
And how difficult was it for you in that community, as a black man in that community, where the whole of what underpinned the whole film was the post-apartheid South Africa and the way that this community was responding to that?
Well, to be honest with you, it wasn't difficult at all, because I don't think that there were. I was treated badly. I think that there just is a frustration with that group of people, and it's not played out in acts of racism or acts of violence. It's just played out in almost them not really trying to do anything about it. They've accepted their situation as their fate, and they're going to die in that park, and that's the way they see their lives going. So as a result of that, they didn't treat me any differently. They just, they were who they were, and they weren't ashamed of it for camera, and that's why we got those kinds of conversations.
So in terms of the method, the way that you make those films, the way that when you were in South Africa, there was one particular couple and their two children who sold cigarettes out of the of a broken down building they were living in. Yeah. That was just you just genuinely stumbled across them, did you? Were those people that you because they become really significant characters in the
well, the truth of the situation is that the researchers and the director, the producer and the director went out. Maybe obviously research is done, and you've got fixers, and two members of the team went out maybe a week or two before I did, and they identified that block as being somewhere that we needed to go, because there's huge problems, with crime and drug abuse in there. And there were a couple of people who were game to talk, maybe 4 or 5 in fact, and we didn't know where the stories would take them. We just knew that there was a couple in that room that have a kid, there's a couple over there that have issues with heroin, there's a couple over there. And in talking to them quite quickly, we realized that their story was a unique one, so we followed it. And it wasn't that some sort of questionnaire was filled out before I arrived. It was just we identified that their story would be different to the heroin story down the corridor. And the minute that I felt that I identified with the father, based not only on his age but his outlook on life, there was a connection that was made, and it became a thread that ran through the film.
Mm. And going back to what you were saying earlier about shedding yourself, I think that anyone who's seen that film, that you're very, very present in that film. When I see that film, you're extraordinarily present. You're not the Reggie Yates who presented The Voice who's in the film, but in terms of your the way that you question, the way that we saw in that clip, the way that you question, the way that you empathise and relate to people,
right?
That feels like it's at the heart of what you do. So I'm interested in what you mean by the sort of shedding.
It's not sort of a mandate that my management and I have sort of decided this is the way you're going to behave on these types of films. I think it's, when I say shedding myself, I mean shedding TV me. Okay. Because for so long I've been a version of me on camera, which you have to be, I think, as a presenter. At their core, the best presenters are people that we feel we know. So we all feel that we know Davina. We know what she likes, and we know her sense of humour, etc. But we don't know who she truly is. We know the version of her that she presents. Whereas in this, and sorry, to go back to the presenter thing, I think that I found a level of success as an entertainment presenter, and continue to, because I still do bits of entertainment, because I feel that people connect to elements of that entertainment version of me. But quite quickly I realised that version of me in documentaries just doesn't wash, because it's not a shiny floor studio. You're meeting real people with real fucking problems, and you've got no choice but to actually listen to them, make eye contact, tune into what they're saying, and ask questions that you would do if the camera wasn't there. Otherwise, they're not going to engage with you. And that is what I mean when I say shedding. It's sort of dropping this TV persona and just being you, being the person that you would be with your mates. Or if someone in your family came to you with these problems, how would you talk about it? And what that then leads on to is this idea of empathizing with someone, because regardless of how atrocious a person is and their beliefs are at their core, they're still a person. At one point they were a child who had no ideas, and who they've become, I might not necessarily agree with, but I should give them the floor to tell me who they are and why they are the way they are, and allow the people at home to decide whether that makes them a good person, a bad person, or a person affected by their environment.
It's interesting with the South Africa films, because I felt that there was always someone that you liked, and there was someone who that you didn't just empathise with, you sympathised with them, that you felt that at a degree you could understand whatever their beliefs were, the issues that they faced. I think it'd be interesting to move on to Russia, where it's a...
Where I didn't like anyone?
Not that you didn't
That's
like
not true.
anyone, but where it's it felt that it was challenging you in other ways in terms of in terms of the issues, but also in terms of that the people weren't necessarily as open to engaging with you as they might have been in South Africa, even though the situations might be, that was obviously very complex in South Africa. Should we watch the clip
Sure.
before we talk about it? So not much to empathise with there.
No, but again, that's that thing of something that I learned going back to the roof conversation in Camden Town. It's not actually about me. He's saying really offensive things. And instead of me getting angry about it, which is what I probably would have done before, and if he was in a pub, he would have got chinned. But in that environment, in that environment, it's not about me. Therefore, I can't remember who it was that someone described it as handing them the rope to hang themselves with. So rather than me getting frustrated with what he's saying, tell me more. It's also my children might be born with abnormalities, or so I'm a mongrel. And then very quickly you get to the core of who he is and what it is he truly believes. It's not just a statement that you can sort of pick apart and say, well, maybe he didn't mean that. Let's get to the point, and let's get to the basis of your beliefs and just how fucked up you actually are. And in doing that, and in learning how wrong I got it with Ruth and in some of these other situations like South Africa, it moved forward. And I really felt that with Russia, which is probably why it resonated so well and why it went on to win awards, because I wasn't putting myself first anymore, and I stopped being presenter man and started being someone who was just interested in the good, bad and indifferent and all of their foibles, and was desperate to get to the core of who these people were. So the people sat on their couches could decide for themselves whether they agreed with them or not.
But really interesting for me watching it is that I think it is an extraordinarily strong film, and yet with so many of your films, that central individual that you do really empathise with, the man who got the job in South Africa. We'll go on to talk about Clifton in the Ferguson film, but the person who is I can't remember his name. Is it Vadim?
Yeah.
Vadim, who he's the person you get closest to, but he's a knife-wielding right-wing fundamentalist.
Yeah.
Did that put you in a different position? In terms of empathy?
Well, yeah, quite quickly, I could have been sort of back of fag packet assessment of him that he is this disgusting, awful person. But the minute we went to his flat, I got him. Because he lives in this one-bedroom, horrible council government building on the 700th floor with not much going on in his life, and posters of knife-wielding men on his walls and no girlfriend, and a massive knife collection that he treasures like his friends. How can you be angry at that man? You feel sorry for him. And that was the thing that I felt was consistent in Russia. One of the openings, in fact, not only was it the opening sequence of the first film, but it was the first thing I shot the day I got off the flight. So I got off the flight, fucking freezing. I was like, why am I here? What am I doing? And then I went to this nationalist march, and I am the only black man for miles, surrounded by thousands of Russians who are hurling abuse at me. Some of them are throwing peanuts at me. There's monkey chants. There's all sorts of things being said around me. And I didn't fit. A lot of people have spoken to me about that on the street. How did you do that? Why did you put yourself in that situation? Weren't you scared? Or they said, you're incredibly brave. Scared and brave, I don't think, define what happened in that, because that wasn't the situation. I was so sad. I was saddened by what I saw, not because I'm a super macho man and I'm not scared of anything, because I was surrounded by young men and women in their early to mid-20s who had these horrendous views. And in a time like this, when you can socially educate yourself online, on your phone, for God's sakes, it's sad to see young people who have those views that their grandparents you could excuse having. So it was just really heartbreaking to see that, as opposed to being scary, because, I mean, they're kids. None of them were going to do anything to me, but they were behaving in a way that they felt that they needed to not only be normal and to fit in, but to represent the views that they've aligned themselves with.
I mean, in terms of identifying with the particular situation that you're in Russia, you're with white nationalists, you're looking at the world from a very, very different, set of circumstances. How did it challenge you as a program maker in terms of, we've spoken about story and empathy, but how did it challenge you in terms of not having the things that are familiar, issues that are familiar with you? I mean, yes, it was a story about race, but the South African race story, to me, feels closer to us, feels a more familiar story. Yeah. What you were uncovering or exploring felt a very different story. How foreign was it for you? How difficult was it to tell that story?
Well, massively, and I think that's what made the films unique, because, well, not unique, made them important and special, because it goes back to that idea of learning on camera with your audience. I was, and to sort of give a bit more context, I think when it comes to the extreme films in particular, we make sure that I only know so much about a person I'm about to meet, or generally I know nothing about the people I meet on camera, but the intricacies of an issue or a situation or a group or whatever that I'm about to sort of spend time with and or meet, I generally turn up knowing what I would have known had I met them in a lift. And I think that allows me to take people as I find them. And when they start to say things like we saw that young man say in the hallway there, that is when I'm like, oh, this is how you feel, this is what you believe. And I think that in situations like the Russia series, I was continuously faced with worlds such as, the teen model factory and then this extremist thing, and then the not so much the homosexuality episode. The attitudes, yes, were new to me, but being around gay people, you live in London, you work in telly, so it's part of your daily experience. So, and my family, etc. But yeah, this level of attitude and the way that things were, it was the first time I was exposed to that, and I was exposing it and dealing with it in the way that I think a lot of the audience would have done. So that is part of the way that story is told, and also part of what makes it unique and special.
And what do you say of the criticism that would have been, that you should put experts in there? That it comes back to, is somebody who is going in looking for the human story rather than someone. I mean, this is one of the stories of our age. It's a really important unfolding story. And should that story be told by a journalist? How different would it be told?
Well, it comes back to that thing of looking at someone like Louis. I think at Weird Weekends, we met a very different version of Louis to who we see today. And I love the Louis that exists today, because he's sort of graduated into this incredible marquee filmmaker, and I'm still confused as to why I'm between Michael Moore and Louis Theroux on the DocFest posters, because they're the two people that have not only inspired me but taught me a hell of a lot about documentary filmmaking. And I think when you look at the Louis that we met in Weird Weekends, this was a man who was interested in people and was not attacking a subject matter, at least on camera, maybe in the voiceover, but on camera and in the presence of the contributors. He was not delivering a journalistic approach. He was having fun with them and breaking them down to a point where they would say or do something that told us who they truly were and got to the heart of the issue. And that way of attacking a subject matter is something that really resonates with me, because I think, we're all here because we like to learn, and there's nothing better than learning about a new person and their world and their experiences, and the way in which that was achieved in Weird Weekends is something that I feel I've definitely tried to incorporate in what it is that I do when I meet someone. I guess.
After Russia, you the next film that we're going to talk about is with the film that you made in Ferguson. So it's a year after the
Darren Brown.
The killing of Darren Wilson.
Sorry, Darren Wilson.
Sorry, Michael Brown. Michael Brown
Darren
was killed
Wilson,
by Darren
yeah.
Wilson.
Just confused.
Yeah. So that film takes you into a community, another community that is fracturing. Should we look at the clip and then talk about what your experience there?
Sure.
So the whole of American media, the whole of the world's media had descended on Ferguson after the killing. So your presence there, you're not the unique presence that you might be in the South African slum or in the outsider that you are in
Russia.
In Russia, you are suddenly just one of another load of media that are coming in. How did you approach the story in a way that meant that that you were able to explore access in a different way, and B, that the story that you were going to tell, which was going to be different from what everyone else is?
Well, I think to begin with, I sort of attacked it from a real conversational place. And that was, my director and I spoke quite a bit prior to going out there about America and what we see America as being. And I thought that I knew America because I've been back and forth from America for years. I made a show on I spent a year in America making a travel show for Kids TV when I was a lot younger, and I thought that I knew America. I really don't. Us sort of media wankers, we go to New York and LA and Miami and never go anywhere else. And there's this huge bit that really is America. And I think in making this film, for the first time, I spent some time in the Midwest and got to feel what it means to be in America and to be in a place where you've got this huge gulf between rich and poor, to be in America where communities are divided by race, where you've got your Latin community, you've got Chinatown, you've got the Italians live over here, the whites live here, the blacks live there, and they never, ever mix or interact. And that to me is America. That to me is why it was, this film was not only an important film to make, but also why I understood what has happened there. And through meeting someone like Clifton, one of the young men who we spent a chunk of the film with, I really got to understand what it meant to be a black man in that environment and what it means to walk in neighborhoods that aren't necessarily yours. America is a very strange place, and it's an incredible place at the same time, but it's really, really strange.
Did it feel as strange as, because on the outside, Russia, South Africa feel stranger?
I think America's weirder, personally, because you know what you're getting when you go to South Africa. The history is fresh, and people talk about it. On my off day, I went to Robben Island, and there were people from all over the world, and there were white South Africans and black South Africans going there to educate themselves on their country's history. But the civil rights movement wasn't that long ago, and it's something that is sort of swept under the rug and not really taught in schools. It's a really weird culture that ignores some of its truths and some of its more recent uncomfortable truths. And that is why Trump is the next American president. In fact, it's going to happen, because I think that we, as this massively liberal sort of society that we exist in, we'd like to believe that that's not going to happen, and it's ridiculous, but that definitely is going to happen.
I don't know if we want to go there, but in terms of your own motivation to make that film, I said this to you when we spoke about it the other day, that is there a more sort of political Reggie in there? Did you feel that not in a sort of, polemical way, but that in terms of your own beliefs and in terms of your own sense of injustice.
Yeah.
That, I mean, how do you distance the documentary maker that gets to the story from your own political views in a situation like
Well,
this?
it's trying to meet as varied a group of people as possible. And I think that we achieved that with the Ferguson film because we spend a huge chunk of time with the police force. We spend a lot of time with the people who are supporting Officer Darren Wilson. Something that happens later on in that sequence that we've just seen is that I speak to a lady who makes cakes for the police force and delivers them and makes T-shirts and makes all sorts of bits and pieces that she sells. And her group have raised over £1 million for Darren Wilson, who killed Mike Brown. And when you start to meet people like that, you understand that there is a lot more to this story than you would think as a Brit being outraged watching the news. And you have to sort of stop yourself from cutting people off and from arguing with them and from rowing with them and getting your point across, because your point isn't important. You're there to hear theirs. And in going from these one community to the next and hearing their stories and hearing their truth in its entirety, and sometimes in its uncomfortable, at its full uncomfortable length, you're able to paint a really real and clear picture of what is actually going on, which is what I think we got quite close to with the Ferguson film. But there was still a long way to go, I think. That's one of the things I got from coming back from Ferguson, knowing how much more I need to do in terms of being involved in the entirety of the film, not just being the guy who turns up and has this experience and goes home and sits in a chair rocking back and forth for a week in tears. I think now, since becoming a producer in some of these more recent films, I'm starting to really stamp my experience and my journey on every part of the film, and I think the films are now better for it.
So tell us what this is, that sense of frustration when you got back from Ferguson, rocking on your chair, as you said. What was going through your head as you were rocking?
Well, that there's very little hope. It's that horrible cliche thing in docs, you go on a journey and you end the film with hope. And I bloody hate that. I actually prefer the films that sometimes end on an uncomfortable question and don't give you a solution. And I like the fact that the films that, particularly these last 3 films that I've made, have done that, because that's the reality. Things aren't always tied up in a neat little bow at the end of a conversation or at the end of a pretty uncomfortable level of exposure to something new. Sometimes you walk away without an answer, and I think that that's important. And what I hope to do is to start conversations. And I think that is what I was able to achieve in the beginning, but in a much more intense way now, that's definitely what's happening. I mean, as someone who's still making entertainment, and spent tons of time in radio and all these different, in drama and all these different lanes, the barometer for me has always been the man on the street. I always knew that as a presenter, people were into what I was doing because they didn't call me wanker on the street. Whereas some people that I work with, that happens all the time, genuinely, no names necessary. But as a presenter, I've had a really nice experience with the public and with the man on the street after doing something huge. So for instance, the biggest gig I've had as a presenter was The Voice. It was an amazing experience, and everywhere I went, white van men would bid their horns, you kiss babies, it was lovely. But then,
like the Queen.
Pardon me?
You're like the Queen.
Yeah, pretty much. But then with docs, when someone on the street wants to stop me, it's not, nice suit the other day, or what's Holly like? It's not that. It is, have you got 2 minutes, can I talk to you? Or I had a really interesting conversation with my family after seeing your show, thank you. Or you said everything that I've wanted to say to my mum for the last 5 years about a particular topic, thank you. Or even more importantly, with the UK series, we did a film about being black, British and gay. And with a brother who came out not that long ago, seeing how a black, African, British man has to deal with that experience firsthand, it was a film that I know that I needed to make. And off the back of that film, I really realized just the power of docs, because I was getting tweets, I was getting Facebook messages and all sorts that I was screen grabbing and keeping for me, because I think there was 4 or 5 people who told me in different ways that as the credits were rolling, or that same night, or the next day, they came out to their parents because of the film. and because of the journey of some of the people that they saw on screen. And that, for me, is when you're actually making something of purpose, of scale, and of weight. And that's the sort of thing you want people to say to you on the street, as opposed to nice suit. Do you know what I mean?
I was going to say, how hard was it to make the series closer to home? You know, obviously with these other Russia, South Africa, Ferguson, that there's that sense of trying to translate the exotic to a sort of domestic audience, but suddenly you're in the UK and you're looking at people whose lives are in the extremes within the UK.
Yeah.
So let's look at the clip from Gay and Under Attack.
Okay.
So he's gone on a bit of a journey, hasn't he?
Well, he pulled that night.
Did he?
Yeah, he did. It was amazing. Yeah, that film was really special because, you know, that's just one of the journeys that we sort of. I hate using the word. It's such a horrible cliche documentary word, but that is what happened. Yeah, no, it's fine. That's essentially what happened with that man. You know, he was an imam who was thrown out of his mosque and disowned by his family because he came out, and that's how we begin the film, and we're ending the film with him meeting a guy at a Pride event. You know, that's what you want in terms of seeing somebody blossom, not necessarily always in the most positive way, but you want to see someone who you meet being one thing and showing themselves to be who they truly are, good or bad. And fortunately, in this episode, it was good, it was positive, and it was actually quite sweet to see the journey that he went on. And that, I think, again, with every film, I feel like I'm learning so much about what not only a great doc is, but the role that I should play is, because traditionally in the beginning, I probably would have got in the way of him going off and doing what he did, but it's that idea of knowing when to stand back and when to let things happen. And I think, you know, as fans of docs, I felt for a long time, and I still do kind of feel, that the best docs are docs that don't have anybody like me in them. You know, it's just a camera following a story. You know, I love Cartel Land. I think it's an incredible, one of my favorite documentaries ever, and it's beautiful, unfolds like a drama, which is why I'm so intrigued to see my Scientology movie. And, you know, I've always watched Michael Moore films, and I've always liked them because they've had someone in them who is telling the story, and, you know, the development of the story itself is told through his eyes, and I like that. And that was part of the reason that I felt that I could work in this realm, along with what Louis done. But to be in front of camera in a situation where you're actually trying to focus on someone else, it's important to not get in the way, and that is what I'm now learning. Don't get in the way, but at the same time, give enough of yourself that you being there helps the story, adds a layer of weight and value to it, as opposed to gets in the way of it getting to the audience in the way that you want it to.
There's an amazing scene in that film that I love, and it's like, I think Reggie always hangs out in barbershops, and that barbershops are sort of like your sort of like little motif that you have across the. But you're in a South London barbershop, and you're speaking to a gay, a young gay
DJ.
black guy, who's having his hair cut, and then there's a West African mum who talks about her kid and about what, and there's just this beautiful scene develops, three-way scene between three very, very different parts of modern British life, where you've got a Muslim guy, a West African mum, and the young gay guy. And I just think that, I mean, that's where I would say that, you know,
get out of the way.
Well, you get out of the way, but also it came about because of you. It came about because you were able to pull those.
Yeah, I guess.
Together.
I mean, that sequence, the reason why that sequence really worked, I feel, is that you had people with very different views who, in the space of a 3-minute sequence, there was a shift that you could see on camera. So you have this mother who hasn't been in the country very long. She has a son who's been born and raised here, and she realizes that she's raising her son in an environment that is eternally different to the one that she grew up in, as did her husband. And then suddenly there's this gay man sort of confronting her with the realities of what she might have to deal with should her son tell her he's gay. And to see that shift happen on camera is incredible. And I think with every film, I'm learning how to navigate these environments better. And the role that I played in that was to make him ask her a question and make her engage with him and sit back and let it happen. And that was when something happened that I couldn't have made happen. And the film just comes alive in that moment.
I want to move straight to the final clip, so to the where you've just been, which is Chicago.
Yeah.
So tell us how that film came about, because it's something that Reggie and Sundog, who that you were really wanted to make this film, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, there's several reasons. I'm a massive music fan, and some of my favourite musicians have come out of Chicago. One of my favourite musicians at the moment is an artist called Chance the Rapper, and he talks a lot about Chicago and what's happening there in his music. And weirdly, his new album's a gospel album, but at the same time, it really gets into the intricacies of the problems in Chicago's South Side. And I was fascinated by it, that there's this incredible city that has a huge CBD. But 15 minutes down the road, you've got people living like they're in, I don't know, East Africa, in third world conditions. And it's just unbelievable that these two worlds exist side by side. And it also is unbelievable that they're almost exclusively black on one side and white on the other. So we set out to make a film about the unreal violent gun crime numbers and numbers of deaths and the amount that's spent by local government on dealing with it, etc. We set out to make a film about that and ended up making a film about fatherhood and parenting. And I'm so proud of this film because it does exactly that. It begins as being one thing and quite quickly becomes another. And those are the best kind of films because we didn't plan for that to happen. In fact, we knew that this was the area that we wanted to be in, but we were open to the story taking us in any which direction, in any kind of direction, sorry. And I really, truly feel that that's what happened.
So it's in the edit, very early days in the edit.
Yeah.
Just tell us a bit about the clip that we're about to see.
Okay, so the clip that you're about to see is taken from maybe my first day or second day of filming, where I actually went to the funeral of a young guy called Lee McCormack. And Lee was shot and killed at the age of 20, and this is his funeral. And Lee wasn't a criminal. He grew up with boys who went on to form a gang. And we still don't know who killed him or why, but a lot of people suspect that the reason that he was killed was because of his association with these other young men. And the heartbreaking thing about it is that the room is full of these guys in a gang who want to retaliate on his behalf. But the room is also full of Lee's family who are desperate for that violence to stop. And there's this weird sort of snake eating its own tail thing that's happening out there where if it's your kid who gets killed and it's your kid who's not involved, do you want the killer to go free because they generally don't get caught, or would you like them avenged? And some really interesting, difficult themes come out of that. And the people surrounding the conversation from all sides, from the much more affluent white areas, have their say. And I spend time in the film with a journalist who sits there listening to a scanner every night, and he gets to the scene of the crime before the police sometimes, and you can just see how much it's drained on him because, I mean, for me to say that there's gun violence there is doing what's happening there a disservice because in 16 hours on a Wednesday while we were shooting, 20 people were shot. That's just a Wednesday. Mm-hmm. In the month of May, I think it was something like 250 people were shot in May and 65 were killed. That's just in the south side of Chicago, in a small part of a big city, and it's unbelievable what's happening there. So maybe we should see.
Let's watch the clip. So it's an extraordinarily emotional scene, the most appalling place for someone to no one wants to go be at a funeral. So, but how? Where do you take that? Where does the film?
Yeah, well, to give that a bit more context after seeing it, actually, so that guy that was speaking is a guy called Michael. He worked quite closely with the young man who was killed. He was his mentor. Michael was an ex-gang member, and the kid who was killed, Lee, was essentially kept away from that by him. So that's why he was speaking so passionately, and the people that he's speaking to are Lee's friends who are gang members who are stood at the back of the room, hence him saying, these make you tough, not killing people. And then what he told me afterwards was that the gang that actually killed Lee wanted to, you know, cause more disrespect by shooting at the coffin as it was being taken to the grave, or potentially shooting up the burial itself, which somebody had been shot and killed at a week before. People are starting to get killed at burials now. Now that's, I think that, like what we said, that's ungraded, it's not mixed or anything, that's literally just in the edit as we speak. And I think that might be part of the beginning of the film, because what that then opens up is some unbelievable serendipitous events and some incredible characters that it's a heartbreaking story that unfortunately doesn't have a neat ending. And you know, we spend more time with Michael, the man who was speaking. Michael is actually quite good friends with Lee's father, Lee Senior, so we spend more time with him. I meet a young man called Jamal, who weirdly connects me to the police chief, I believe, and I spend time with him. And the funeral parlour that was burying Lee, I spend some time there, and I meet the lady who, I think the accurate term is the embalmer, I guess. So she dresses the bodies for funerals. We end up having a conversation in a room surrounded by 8 bodies. And for the first time in my life, I actually smelt death. I didn't know what it smelled like. This weird mix of stale bodies breaking down and formaldehyde. It's just strange. The film goes in so many interesting directions, and we really do get, I believe, to the core of the sadness that the people on the South Side feel and the hopelessness that they feel. And unfortunately, it's hopelessness to a point that so many of the people there feel that they have to leave. And that's kind of where it's headed. So I truly feel that it is one of the strongest films that I've made yet, and also it will be one of the most gut-wrenching, because through everything that I've learned so far, I'm able to get out of the way of some of the toughest moments and allow them to happen in front of us and allow people to truly talk about how they feel, but also give enough of myself that not only makes sense for me being there, but also connects me to the subject matter in an authentic way. Because authenticity is incredibly important to me, and I think it's important that if there is someone fronting a film, they are either invested enough or connected to the subject matter that explains as to why the fuck they're there. Because whenever an offer comes into my management or comes through me or whatever, the first question we ask is it good? And secondly, it's why? Why should I do this? Why me? Where does it fit? And I think that this film really does fit because it speaks to lots of things that are important to me, such as mentoring, fatherhood, family, and this idea of a village and of a community. And that really comes out quite strong, I think, in this film. So between this Chicago film and the new series that we've just shot in Mexico and we shot in Texas, I think that this next round of docs, I think, reflect far more where I am as a man and also as a documentary maker. And I would like to think that as time goes on, these films continue to reflect my headspace and my growth away from camera and on camera as well.
Thank you, Reggie. We've got about 10 minutes, I think, for questions.
Oh.
If
Should we do
anyone
that?
would like to ask,
There we go.
ask any questions. Are there where are the mics? Oh, there's a woman at the back there, just in the middle.
I
think
they're
there should
getting
be
him.
mics.
Your voice is loud. Hey, there's a mic that's coming right now. Keep talking.
Can you hear me though?
Yes, we
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, after you do these documentaries, do you ever just feel like when you leave, because you're kind of the role of a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, you're there to learn, but do you feel like you should leave a part of yourself with your views to change their perception? Say, for example, that lady in South Africa who had completely different views about race, the apartheid. Did you ever feel like you can't give your opinion to change hers, basically?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think, in that clip, I definitely did tell her what I thought, but I didn't go out of my way to ensure that she felt the same way as me in terms of the conversation that we were having, and that I think that is a really good example as to what it is that we try and achieve in these films, and that is not to leave with a conclusion, because who the hell am I to tell South Africa what they're doing wrong and how they need to fix it? I think the smartest way and the healthiest way to leave these situations is to talk to my personal experience, but to end on a question and allow you, the viewer, to sit with your family and talk about it, and for you to create your own conclusions based on everything you've seen, not just my opinion.
And also, how do you maintain that quality of authenticity when you make these films?
From getting it wrong. To begin with, one of my earliest docs that we haven't mentioned today because it's rubbish is a film that I made on gangs, and I was 21 and I was sort of bullied into making a film in a way that I didn't want to make by a director that I didn't feel that I could communicate with or collaborate with. And
was this like the London Gangs one?
Yeah,
right.
And in hindsight, I know that the director would have collaborated with me and would have listened to me because he had no idea about the world that he was getting into. But again, it's confidence from my part that has now made these films become increasingly authentic as time has gone on. And very recently, I made a film on fur and on animal skins and so on and so forth. And that isn't a film that I'm particularly proud of, not because it's a bad film, but because I wasn't the right person to front that film. Because what that film needed was a journalist, and it needed someone who delivered information in a certain way, whereas I'm not that guy. And I think in getting it wrong, I've become so much more crystallized in what it is that I do, what it is that I'm good at, and the sorts of films that I should be making.
Awesome, thank you.
Just the lady at the front here with the...
Is it a race now? All right, my money's on him. No offense.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, I'm from the US, and you're right, it is a strange place when it comes to dealing with these issues that you've dealt with. I'm wondering if you, in your research, looked at the media coverage from American media of these incidents and thought about how you could approach it differently. And also, how did, it's about that, because our media is very divided. It's just as divided as we are. And so I'm just curious as to whether you looked at those things and thought about how can I talk about this, and did you think about your audience being wider than the BBC?
Three questions. I can't remember the order they came, but I'll try and answer all of them as best as I can. I think as Brits, we're fully aware of how different our news is to the rest of the world, particularly America. And before we even get started, I think people like this man ensure that we're not going out there in the same way a news channel would. And as well as that, I think the coverage of a documentary filmmaker is always going to be different to that of someone who makes a news program, for instance. So looking at American news wasn't something that we needed to do necessarily because we knew what that presents. So that was sort of like a completely separate thing. And I'm sorry, what was the second thing that you asked? It was kind of three questions there.
I'm sorry. Well, it was basically did that affect how you thought you might address the issues?
Yes and no. We, I think, are encouraged to be as balanced as we can, which is why in Ferguson in particular, we knew from the beginning that we would not only need to speak to somebody who was protesting, but we needed to speak to the police. And straight away, you start to get a very different idea of what the truth of the situation is, and you get a broader view. So to do that and then to find the sort of more intricate, nuanced voices in between those two extremes is the way to get to the core of a situation, I feel. And I think that that's what we achieved with Ferguson, and definitely is what's been achieved with Chicago.
Thank you. Please come back and do more stories.
Just could you just pass the mic? Let's go there then. Sorry.
There you go.
Hi. God. I was wondering in particular about your misogyny documentary, which was amazing, by the way. I'm really grateful that you shed light on such an issue. Was there any, not that you necessarily misled the people in it, but I think they got the impression that when the documentary was aired, they would look good. And from the response I saw on social media, like a lot of people were disagreeing with them. Did you face any sort of backlash from that? And is that something that would maybe prevent you from ever, like from a really difficult topic, is that something that would scare
honest,
you?
That was the first time. I mean, I think we might have had a conversation about it, that there was a little paranoia about the way that I might be sort of attacked socially afterwards, and, you know, loved ones as well. And there was a little bit, but again, in making the film, you quite quickly realise what sort of men are drawn to the manosphere, and very different parts of it, because, you know, the manosphere, something I learnt about, is made up of very different groups who don't ever want to be confused with each other, which is something I hope came across in the film. And unfortunately, the people in question, particularly the MGTOWs, the men going their own way, they decided they didn't want to be a part of the film because they were paranoid that it would be a hit piece, which it wasn't. And I was desperate to get their views across, and in them not being in the film, we weren't really able to do that. So there was a paranoia about backlash from them and those groups. There has been a bit. There's a few silly videos on YouTube about how I'm a failure as a man, etc. But it is what it is. I knew that it wouldn't particularly ruin my life, and it hasn't done. And I think that we made a film that was as balanced as we could, given the breadth of the subject matter and the hour that we had to film.
Thank you very much.
Just the woman behind on the, about 4 rows up, was the first with a hand up. Yeah, that's it.
Could you discuss where your mind is ethically and your responsibility as a filmmaker in representing some of the participants in your films, those who possibly can be vulnerable, but also people that maybe you don't necessarily agree with their ideologies? Do you feel that both sets of people deserve a fair and balanced representation?
Yeah, and I think that we try our best to be as balanced as possible. There's several layers of BBC red tape that ensures that we do present as balanced a film as we can, and as well as that, we I think have learnt to make sure that to retain trust of a contributor, you have to allow them to feel comfortable and to feel safe when they are divulging their deepest and darkest. So I think we try our best to not only be balanced, but at the same time allow people to feel that they're in safe hands. And I think that people are. I don't think at any point in any of the films I've made, I've taken advantage of anybody, and I don't think I ever would want to.
I think crucially, the contributors are always told the context in which their contribution is going to be used. So if in the misogyny film, they knew that it was a film about the manosphere, they knew it was about the views of the manosphere, didn't they?
Yeah.
So people will always feel, you know, if you're from a particular extreme groups, that you might feel that anything that that goes against the views that you hold is a dilution or is misleading. But I think that the producers are always very clear about the context in which contributions are going to be used.
Is what I would have said if I was a commissioner.
Thank you.
Gentleman over there.
You're someone who's obviously come into this as a presenter. Obviously, you use that loosely, and I agree with that. But from previously being in the media and being familiar to your audiences, firstly, what advice would you have for people who are starting out as being partly in front of the camera? And also, where do you think audiences at the moment stand in their balance between liking a new face and liking to see people who they know and already have come to know through other areas?
It sounds quite cliche in terms of advice, but I think that when I got into television, which you've unfortunately all seen, it was a very different time. And if you wanted to build an audience or build a reputation, you had to get on telly. Whereas now we've got this beautiful thing called the internet where you can build your own audience, and people actually are. Unfortunately, I don't think there are enough people that are building their own audience in factual, but hopefully that will change. So I think that there is this fantastic opportunity to not only build a website, build a channel of your own, and utilize the technology that is so cheap now to create your own sort of head of steam. And generally the people that do that are the people that are searched and found quite quickly by places like the BBC. To speak to your other question about new talent versus faces that we know and like, I'd like to believe that people that are being asked to make docs are being asked for the right reasons. That if they are, I don't know, from the world of music or whatever. And generally, if it doesn't work, you don't see them again. But if they are good, you do. And I think the next talk in this room is with Professor Green, who's a mate, and Stephen is a fantastic filmmaker. Who knew? He's an incredible filmmaker, and his Suicide and Me film is mind-blowing. And to think that's the first time that he's made a documentary is incredible. So regardless of where he's come from, he's made a fantastic film. And will he do it again? He has. Will he continue to do it? Of course, and rightly so. So it goes back to that thing that I was talking about with myself and my management. Is it good, and why me? So if the film's good and the person, I don't know, used to be a puppeteer, who cares? Is the film good? And why is that person presenting it? So if the person fronting the film can find some level of connection to the subject matter, it doesn't matter where they came from, I feel. That can be a new face or someone that used to be in Steps. Doesn't matter, I think.
We've run out of time. We've mostly got one more. We could take one more question. Just here.
Hi.
Hello.
Obviously, a lot of your documentaries face the challenges with race in different countries. How helpful do you think your race is in kind of facing those? Do you think that gives you better access, or do you think it helps kind of bring out their views?
It does and it doesn't. I think it depends where you are, because this accent instantly makes you different in certain places. For instance, in Chicago, the minute I speak, I'm not an African American, I'm other, I'm something else. In Russia, I instantly stand out, but I've got a camera crew with me, so I'm a journalist. I don't know, it's a bit of a weird one because the camera will always be there and this accent will always be there. So it depends where you are in the world. Even in Africa, I'm not seen as an African, which is weird to me. And you know, even in Ghana, where my family are from, when people are speaking a language that I understand, the local language, I'm an Englishman. So I think so long as you've got a camera, you aren't seen as the way you might be if you were just on the street, normally, I think.
Thank you, Reggie.
No problem.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, that was fun. Thank you.